Hey guys! So in this video we are going to talk about learning strategies. So let's get into it. Now this is a really interesting question that I actually got from one of my subscribers today. I actually read it today. And the subscriber was asking me about, basically just to give you a bit of context. I know, we like context on this channel. Context is important. And the subscriber explained this idea that he had that when he talked about different learning strategies just in general in this context is of course going to be about programming, but what he called top-down learning or down-up or bottom-up learning. And what he meant was that he found that there are a lot of people who have different learning strategies for when they want to learn a subject. So in the context of programming, you have these students who approach learning programming from the computer science perspective, or the really low-level details, and then they work their knowledge upwards. So these are people that you will find in, well, computer science, people who study C and C++, these really low-level types of languages, where they really focus on the sort of the underlying mechanics of everything that computers are doing, basically, in all these different programming languages, how they work. And then they get really good at that stuff, right? And they work their way up. And then you have the other category of people who approach it from usually the UI level, where they go top down, where they start at the top of the application or the stack or whatever you want to call it, and they work their way downwards. And he just wanted to kind of hear my thoughts on these two different strategies for learning. And I thought it was a very interesting question, because I've actually touched on this subject a few times in the past in my career, and I have some thoughts on it, like the pros and the cons with these two approaches. And what I can tell you is that there are a few things that I've noticed when I've seen people who approach their learning strategy from these two different angles, and usually how it plays out. Now, in my experience, it's actually one of the reasons why one of my first programming languages was Python, because back in the day when I was starting to learn programming, I was told by some of my tutors the mentors, the people that I looked up to, that one of the biggest problems with, biggest problem might be a strong word, but it was very frustrating, to at least what I understood, for a lot of my more senior mentors, that these are guys who've been doing computer science, and these are the guys who went from bottom up. They know their stuff, really know their stuff. They are extremely skilled. And they found it was very frustrating when they were working in a company, they have coworkers who have approached from the top-down perspective. Because the problem that they found was that these people don't understand the underlying mechanics of how everything works. And I saw this as an example from more than once. It's a classic example. Say let's take Java. Do you know when you should use a linked list instead of an array list? Now, most programmers, and this is actually a classic example, most programmers have no idea when to use one over the other. To them, it's just an arbitrary decision. But it's not. It's actually not. I wouldn't say that it matters a lot. It depends on the case. But this is the sort of thing that these bottom-up type of programmers or learners are talking about, that some programmers don't understand the implications of making certain technical decisions. And it kind of shows. It's sort of the same phenomenon that you see when somebody with a very heavy background, like a really high education, or somebody who is extremely skilled in a certain field, talks to somebody who is self-taught. In general, this is not, of course, a rule. There are self-taught people that are complete geniuses in every way. But the general trend that I see is that the self-taught people have a much more shallow understanding of the underlying mechanics and the engineering aspects of coding. So, From what I've been saying so far, you might think that I'm an advocate of doing bottom-up learning, and that's actually not true. If I were to say anything, I would say that top-down learning is probably the most feasible way for us to solve a very big problem. And let me tell you why. You see, the problem with bottom-up type of learning is that you do not give the students a sense of empowerment quickly enough. What do I mean by that? Well, I mean that the problem with, and I have friends, really intelligent friends who, they're poor bastards, they're in sales these days, but they started out in high school by learning C programming. And the problem that they had is in my opinion, the same sort of issue that you face with mathematics or all of these technical subjects. You approach the problem bottom up, which means that you have the idea that you need to teach people all of the things so that they can then go and learn the interesting stuff. And I argue it's a really dumb way of structuring things when you're teaching something. Because only a handful, maybe that's what you want, because the only people who can make it through such an education are the sort of people who already have either the motivation or the talent or whatever it takes, they have it, that thing that makes you go churn through all the boring quote-unquote stuff to get to the things that are actually empowering. And that's the key thing here, empowering. If you go top down, you will quicker get to a point where you are empowered to do things, the things that you want. And this is a good thing and a bad thing. There are languages out there, which I'm not going to mention any specific languages, but there are a few languages out there that have kind of mastered, like they made an art form of this top-down perspective where the problem is that if you tell me that, oh yeah, I'm very good with this language, and you tell me that that's the only language you know, I'm going to be it's going to worry me a little bit, because the problem is that some things that there are programmers who think that all there is to building software is to understand the bare bone basics, just to make it work. The problem is that yes, such a person is, as I've been saying a few times earlier, like these are people who make it very well in freelance type of situation or at very small companies or things like. But the problem comes when you get up to a point where the actual load and the size of the system is so big that you actually need to understand the difference between an array list and a linked list. You need to understand why it's very, very bad to do heavy computation in in an atomic transaction, in acid, like all these different things, right? These are things that bottom-up learners will learn. But as I said, there are fewer of these people around. So what I think is probably the more sane approach in all of this, because top down, in my experience, it's not a bad thing to be a top down learner. I mean, I like to be a top down learner as well, because as I said, you get empowered quicker, and a sense of empowerment is a very good incentive system to get people to go even further. But that's the key thing. In my experience, top-down learners, and this is not top-down, just top-down, let me just finish. The issue is that people stop before they get all the way through the stack. And that's true for top-down learners and bottom-up learners. Because trust me, I have to this day, I have not met a classic stereotypical reserved conservative super senior bottom-up learner ever be able, I've never met anybody like that who could produce a graphical interface or anything like you can show to a user at all. Like they have it's almost like a characteristic. It's almost like if you are that sort of person you get really enthusiastic about these low level details and optimization and all that stuff. It's almost like it's basically, maybe I'm being, I don't know what to call it, prejudiced, But it seems that they have no skills and no interest whatsoever with the higher level stuff. And then if you go from the other perspective, the top-down learners usually have no interest in the low-level details. And maybe that's the thing that, that's the type of, well, maybe I am an odd case, because for some reason, I love to learn from the top down and from from bottom up. Because to me, the thing is that, I mean, it doesn't really, in my opinion, matter where you start, as long as you make it all the way through. The problem comes when you stop learning, when you stop being curious and you stop going deeper. Because if you stop as a top-down learner, you will only have skin-deep understanding of technical details, and you will actually lack a lot of the skills necessary in order to maintain large-scale systems and that sort of thing. And if you are as I said, on the other side of the spectrum, if you're bottom up, you will never be able to produce a user-facing application. You'll be a great back-end developer, maybe, but yeah. And maybe that's okay. I don't know. So to summarize what I'm saying here is that I think that ideally, if I were to say that if one thing was better than the other, I would say that if you are a complete beginner, start as a top-down type of person. Like start by going from the top of the application stack and working your way downwards, or like knowledge-wise. Like learn the stuff that you need in order to start being to be able to produce things. Because that motivation that you're going to get from feeling that empowerment is going to spur you to do even more stuff. But what I urge you to not do is to lose your curiosity, because at some point you're going to stagnate at the top layer, and in order for you to actually keep on advancing and becoming even better at what you do, you need to go to the bottom level stuff and start to understand the underlying mechanics of what it is that you're doing. And to me, that's the best way to become a really well-rounded, strong developer. And yeah, those are my 2 cents on this thing. So basically, there's no downside with either approach. It's just that I think that starting at the top is going to be a more fun experience than going from the bottom up. Have a great day.